We do have hot apple cider this evening for free up at the shelter if you would like to get some hot apple cider. We also have Halloween candy up there, so help yourselves. We do ask that you take 1 cup of cider until everyone gets an opportunity to have some cider this evening. Okay, without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the stage Laura from the Bloomington Storytellers Guild.
It's so nice to see you all tonight. Thank you for coming. I made some cookies for tonight, some pumpkin cookies, and well, I was kind of talking on the phone when I was making them, and I didn't realize that I had pricked my finger, and some of the blood kind of fell in the batter, and well, you won't even notice it. Uh, so why did you come tonight? Did you want to see how much fear you can stand? Well, we're here to stretch your mind, and it's much better than stretching your neck, right? So, we're here with some tales to tingle your spine. And our first teller tonight is Jenny Ritchie.
Hello. I'm so delighted to be here again telling stories for the 49th time. I actually have a story to tell you that's older than I am. Hard that is to believe. I know, don't laugh. It really is. It's not a Greek myth. Seriously. This story happened in the early 1940s. And at that time, there was a fella named Jack Peacock, and he lived in New Orleans. And Jack lived by his luck, and sometimes it was good luck, but most of the time it was not. And then Jack felt that his luck had finally changed for the better when he got the news that a distant cousin had died and left him the family farm. Yes, he had the deed to the old Peacock farm, and he could just see himself out there with his cozy little farmhouse looking out over his own fields. He couldn't wait. Got into his old Ford and drove out of New Orleans, drove deep into the Louisiana backcountry, where the roads were not only not paved, they weren't even gravel, they were dirt, and they weren't much wider than his car. And they certainly did not have any signs. And pretty much everything looked alike. Yeah, he was lost. Jack was good and lost, and he started looking for a house where he could ask for directions. Came to a crossroads, looked up one side, looked up the other. Ah, he saw up there a kind of shabby old farmhouse, nearly hidden by the weeds that had grown up around it. But on the porch, there was somebody. Ah, he thought, at last, I'll get directions. So he got out of the car and he strolled up to the house, and as he walked up, he noticed that the barn behind the house was missing slats, and the roof was rusted, and the shed was nearly overcome with the vines and the briars, and the house wasn't in any better condition. It hadn't seen a paintbrush in decades. And on that sagging porch, sitting in an old wooden rocker, was the oldest woman he'd ever seen. She looked ancient. She was wearing a plain white shift, kind of stained, and her hair was all matted and curled, and it looked like she hadn't taken a comb to it for a long time. But Jack thought, my good luck. There's someone who's old enough to know where everything around here is. So he went right up, put his elbow on the railing and said, "Can you tell me the way to the peacock farm?" "Well, I can, but you don't want to go there." "Of course I do. I am the new owner." "Oh, well, that might be, but I doubt it," she said. "I tell you what, I got a story for you. If you listen to my story and you still want to go to the peacock farm, I'll tell you where it is." "Oh, just my luck," thought Jack. I got a humor just to get directions. Took off his hat, started fanning his face. "All right," he said, "I'll hear your story." "Well," she said, "years ago, old man Peacock had a load of land around here. And he had enough that when he died, he gave a farm to every one of his children. And there was one farm left over. It was a pretty good farm. Land was fine, house all furnished up. But didn't nobody want that farm? 'Cause it was haunted." "Oh boy," thought Jack. "All right." "Yes," she said. "Now, old man Peacock had a grandson named Micah. And Micah, he didn't feel feared of anything. And he said to the others, he said, 'If I can go in there and lay that ghost, can I have that farm?' And they all said, 'If you can go in there and lay that ghost so you can live there, you can have it,' 'cause nobody wanted it. Well, Micah, that very night, he went into the house with his Bible in his hand, sat down in the front room and commenced to reading. He read forwards, he read backwards, and pretty soon he heard somebody in the next room, somebody opening doors, somebody walking on the creaky floors. He heard somebody rattling the windows. But Micah just didn't let on he heard anything. No. He just sat there reading until somebody came into the room with him and blew out his lamp. Micah just lit the lamp and went on reading. After a bit, it got quiet, and Micah thought he'd just go lie down and rest. He went into the bedroom and he lay down on top of the covers with his shoes on, and that made the ghost mad. So when Micah looked up, there was a figure right beside the bed, just like a real person. And he saw a long, skinny arm reach out under the bed and, whoa, turn the bed over with Micah under it. But Micah just crawled out, went in the kitchen, lit 2 lamps and went on reading all night long, just afore daybreak. That ghost come again, said Micah Peacock. You can leave today, but if you ever come back again, you're a dead man. Micah left, but he came back. The next night, he came with reinforcements. He got himself a preacher. And just to make doubly sure, he got himself a priest. And they both brought their Bibles, and they all sat down and they all started reading backwards and forwards until they heard someone in the next room. And they heard the doors slamming, and they heard the locks rattling. And the preacher, he got up, ran out, and never came back again. Now, the priest lasted a little longer. He lasted until somebody came into the room and blew cold air down his collar. Then he run out and left Micah all alone. I don't believe the ghost spoke to Micah again. But sure enough, in the morning, there was his cold body still sitting in the chair, book still open, and a bloody trail to the corner where his head had been pulled off and rolled away. Indeed. Now, sir, I got to tell you, ain't nobody tried to lay that ghost ever since. Oh, okay, says Jack, puts his hat back on. I guess I've been warned. So, you've told me your story. Now you tell me where that Peacock farm is. Like a snake striking, her hand came out and grabbed his wrist, and her old fingers held him like an iron vice. He thought his bones would just break like balsa wood. Oh, yes, she said. You've been warned. This here is the Peacock farm. Are you still sure you want to stay? Of course I do, said Jack. Go me. He said, what do I care about a ghost in a story? Let him come. Why, if he... Who told you the ghost were a he? Oh, deep in the back country of Louisiana, off a nameless dirt road, there's a dilapidated old farmhouse. And there's nothing on the front porch except an empty rocker bobbing back and forth. And that is where Jack Peacock's luck finally ran out. Our stories come from all sorts of places, and that one comes from a marvelous storyteller, story collector, story writer named Robert D. Sanssouci. And now, that's from the old to the new. Jonathan has a story for you.
Hello, I do have a new story for you. This is an adaptation of a creepypasta that is called satellite images. Now, the coronavirus lockdowns, everyone's favorite time, was very hard for me, mentally and physically, very emotionally isolating. And like a lot of people, I struggled with that. And I looked for ways to escape that trapped feeling. During normal times, I would have gone out and seen people, but I couldn't go anywhere, and so I was stuck. Until one day I had a thought. Google Earth. With just the click of a button, I could go anywhere. I could see anything. In a time that was so void of other people, just seeing bustling and crowded parks and plazas was just comforting in a way. Every few nights before bed, I would sit at my laptop and I would scroll along streets of cities around the world. I went to tourist attractions like the pyramids of Egypt and Dracula's castle, the Great Barrier Reef. But my favorite thing to do was to just pick a random city somewhere in the world, drop myself on a random street, and see all of the people that I could find. Now, their faces were always blurred to protect their privacy, but it was still good just to see them there, living their lives, oblivious to the future that I knew too well. There was no mask in sight. Everyone was just walking around in crowds like it was no big deal. It was crazy, and it was a great break from the lockdown. One night, though, there was a woman in Tokyo who caught my eye. She was the only splash of color in a sea of people wearing black and white, probably all heading to or from work. She wore a bright red jacket with matching red pants and a blue-green backpack. She walked very relaxed with one hand skating along the building next to her, and she seemed so happy. I bet if I could have seen her face, if it wasn't blurred out, she would have been smiling. Her curly brown hair shining in the sun. She seemed so free. I sat for a minute and took in just how happy she was. And then I started to get a little bit sad, and so I turned off the computer and I went to bed. And then another night, not long after that, I was looking around Paris. Now, Paris was always one of my favorites. I loved all of the architecture, and there were always so many people to see everywhere. I dropped myself on a random street. This one was lined with little brick shops on one side and a big tan church on the other. Ahead of me, there was an intersection, and dozens of people walked by. There was an old man in a blazer looking back at an old woman with her hair tied up in a scarf, carrying a purse that was far too large for her. There was a woman staring in the shop windows. There was a couple leading some small children around the corner. I turned the view slightly, and then I noticed something peculiar. Lounging on a bus stop bench, there was a young woman dressed in red. With a start, I noticed her curly brown hair and the blue-green bag sitting on the bench next to her. How could this be the same woman? I thought. That's crazy. This is a different country, a different continent even. How could it be her? I mean, this is kind of a stupid reaction if I'm being honest. She was probably just a traveler, maybe an influencer. Besides, with her face being blurred, there was no way for me to tell that it was actually the same person. I mean, brown hair is super common, and you could probably buy red pants on Amazon any day of the week. I cleared my mind of it and went to bed. Until another night, not long after that. I was looking around Berlin this time. I dropped myself on a random street, as usual. This one was pretty empty. I didn't see any people right away, so I scrolled down the road, past big brick buildings that looked honestly more like factories than anything else. I scrolled past empty lots filled with piled gravel and long grass. The only person I saw was a young boy who looked like he was maybe heading to school. He wore a jacket, carried a book bag. I was disappointed. There really wasn't much to see in that part of Berlin. I moved my mouse to the corner of my screen to zoom out and try a different spot when I noticed something in the corner of my view. I turned slightly, and there she was. She was standing on a street corner this time next to a sign. She had one hand on the post and was leaning out, looking down the road, almost as if waiting to cross. I stared in shock. How could she be here too? I mean, even if she was a traveler, there is no way that I would just find her each time. Even finding her in Paris was one heck of a coincidence, but this was weird, right? I thought maybe, is this a joke? Is Google playing a prank on people that use Google Earth too much? It would have been a great Easter egg in the program. So I did a quick search to see if I could find anything about a woman who shows up everywhere like Waldo, and I didn't find anything. I saw a bunch of articles about the weird stuff you can see on Google Earth, but nothing about a woman who travels the world with you. I messaged one of my friends, who I knew would still be awake that late at night, and I asked him to look at where I was in Berlin, and also to look at where I had been in Paris and in Tokyo. And I asked him if he saw the same woman. And then I waited. Now, irrationally tense, I'll admit. A few minutes later, his reply read, "I see the woman you're talking about in Berlin, but I don't see her in Paris or in Tokyo. Are you okay?" I didn't respond. Something felt off about this now, and I wasn't really having fun anymore. I went back to Paris and Tokyo to see if I could find her again, and I did. She was there. She was there, but she was different. In Paris, she wasn't just relaxing on the bus stop bench anymore. Now she was leaned over looking for something in her bag. In Tokyo, she wasn't standing next to the building, but she was crouched down, petting a cat at her feet. In each city, I scrolled the view forward and backward to see if maybe the camera caught her just as she moved, but she didn't. She was firmly stuck now in those new positions. I switched the view to Brussels this time. Dropped myself on a random street. This one was lined with low-rise buildings with shops on the ground floor and apartments above. I quickly scanned the streets. No sign of her. They were empty except for a couple wearing matching sweaters. I looked once more, and she wasn't there. I breathed a sigh of relief. I couldn't believe I was getting so worked up over this. I mean, it was all just a crazy coincidence, right? I mean, I didn't know how she moved in Paris and in Tokyo, but it was fine, I thought. And then I stopped, my eyes frozen on the screen in front of me. Now ahead of me, there was a fork in the road, and in the fork in the road, there was a white building. And on the second floor of that building, a wrought iron balcony. Now I hadn't seen her at first because I was just looking at the streets. But there, she stood on the balcony this time, leaning over the railing, head tilted ever so slightly in the direction of the camera, almost like she was looking towards me. I switched the view again to Sydney this time, and there she was, leaning against the wall of a bright blue pharmacy. In London, she was getting ready to board a red double-decker bus. She was everywhere I looked. She stood on a bridge in Venice, in a crosswalk in Zurich, and in Hong Kong. She stood between a bank and a McDonald's adjusting her bag. In each location, she seemed casual and candid, relaxed, but I noticed with chills that in each, she was closer and closer to where I first dropped the camera, almost looking at me with her blurred out face. By now, it felt like bugs were crawling on my skin, ice down my back, sand in my mouth. I couldn't catch my breath. What was going on? I didn't know what to do. Do I send screenshots to Google? I mean, I doubt there's a place where you can report this kind of a thing. What was happening? Was I following her? Was she following me? I wish I could see her face. I wish I could see what she saw when she looked back at me. I wanted to run, but then I had a thought, and shaking, I typed the name of my city into the search bar. I dropped myself on a random street, as per usual. This time I landed outside of a park, a few blocks from my apartment, and there she was. There she was, just a little ways from my house now. And she wasn't relaxed anymore. Now she stood straight up, and she looked directly into the camera, directly at me. She was near me now. She was watching me. I could feel it. I scrolled the view down the street, and this time, instead of staying still, as she had everywhere else, she moved with the view. She was walking alongside me. As I scrolled, she moved faster, her stride widening with each click. In just a few frames, her steps were noticeably unnaturally long, and she was still getting faster. I scrolled, and then she was ahead of me, and I was just looking at her backpack. Again, and I realized she was at my street, and she was starting to turn. I clicked again, then she disappeared around the corner, and suddenly my doorbell rang. Now, my apartment complex had a video doorbell system set up for every unit, and there was a little camera outside and a little screen by the front door, so you could see who was out there. And I could see that screen from where I sat, and that screen turned on, and I saw a flash of red with brown hair, a face blurred by the cheap camera outside. I slammed my laptop shut, and the screen turned off. And I sat. For seconds or for hours, I listened to the loudest silence that I have ever heard. Now, I've not opened Google Earth since that day. But if I'm honest with myself, I really don't know how much of a difference that makes anymore. That's what worries me.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dana, and I am here to tell you a not often told grim tale, and grim with two M's, as in the brothers. But it is a pretty grim tale as well. And it's called Godfather Death. There was once a very poor man, and he had 12 children. When the 13th child was born, he realized there was no way he was going to be able to take care of this child. He decided to set out and find this child a godfather. The first stranger that he came to already knew he was coming. He reached out his hand and he said, "Let me be the child's godfather." And the man looked at him and said, "Who are you?" "I am the good God." Well, it sounded good to the man for a minute, but then he thought, I've been poor my whole life, and I've worked hard, and I've seen other people, they don't do anything, and they're rich. And he said, "No, you can't have my son because you are not fair." And he went along and he found the next stranger. And this stranger also knew he was coming. And he reached out his hands and he said, "Give me the child, because if you give the child to me, he will be rich." "Who are you?" said the man. "I am the devil." "No," he said, "you cannot have my child. You deceive people, and in the end, you give them nothing. No, you cannot have my child." And so he went a little farther on until he met the third stranger, and this stranger also knew he was coming, and he reached out his hands and he said, "Let me be your child's godfather. Anyone who is a friend of mine does well in life." "Who are you?" said the man. "I am death." Well, that frightened the man. And he didn't think that it would be a good idea, but then he thought about it. And he thought, rich, poor, beloved, hated, they all met death in the end. Death was fair. So he agreed, and death became the child's godfather. Now, when this child grew up and became an adult, death came to him and said, "It's time for me to give you your present And he and Death walked into a forest, and they came to a little clearing, and Death bent down, and he picked up an herb, and he said, "Put this herb in your pocket. I am going to make you a very successful physician, but you must listen to me. When you go to your patients, you'll find me there. I will be at the head of the bed, and when I am, you will give them this herb and they will live. But if I am at the foot of the bed, you must not give them this herb, because they are to die and they are going to be mine. They are my property." The godson had always been very obedient, and he said yes. He agreed he would do that. Well, as the years went by, he did become a very successful physician, because when he came to the patient's bedside, if Death was at the head of the bed, he would give the patient the herb and the patient would live. And if Death was at the foot of the bed, the patient would die. And this was after all the other physicians had already seen these patients, so they knew, this physician knew whether or not a patient was going to live or die. Well, because he had that reputation, he became more and more successful. And as the years went by, he became richer and richer, and more people loved him. He was the richest doctor in his village. He was the most beloved person in his village. One day, a messenger came from the king and told him, "You need to come to the castle now." Well, when he got to the castle, there was the king in his bed. And there was Death at the foot of the bed. Oh no, he thought, I can't be the physician who announces that the king is going to die. I'll be like all those other physicians who said that he was going to die. And I don't want that. He's a good king. I can't do that. Surely, being the godson of Death, Death will forgive me. And so he ordered the servants to turn the bed around. And now Death was at the head of the bed. He reached into his pocket, he gave him the herb, and the king lived. Well, when this young doctor got home, his godfather was waiting for him. "You defied me," he said, "after I explicitly told you not to." Well, this frightened the young doctor. He bowed his head and he said, "I'm sorry." Death took pity on him and said, "I'll forgive you, but I'm only going to forgive you once. Don't you ever do that again, because if you do, I will come for you. You will be mine. You will be my property." All right, that frightened the godson. Word spread that this young doctor had saved the king. And now he was not only the most famous doctor in his village, now he was the most famous doctor in all of the kingdom. Now he had so many patients, he couldn't even keep up with them all. He was now the richest person in the kingdom, except for the king. And he was the most adored person in the kingdom, except for the king. The years went by. He became richer and richer. He was handsome. He was successful. And then one day, the king's messenger came back. And he said, "You need to come to the castle immediately." But this time it wasn't the king. This time it was the princess. And when he showed up, there was Death at the foot of the princess's bed. And the king rushed over to the young doctor and he said, "You have to save her. You must save her. If you save her and she wakes up and you ask her if she'll marry you and she says yes, you will become the king. Well, this was too much for this young doctor. And he thought, I can't let her die. I'm going to become king. And he ordered the servants to turn that bed around. He reached into his pocket and he gave her the herb, and the princess woke up. He asked her to marry him, and she said yes. He was going to be the king. He was going to be the richest and most adored person in the kingdom, maybe even the whole world. But that fantasy didn't last long because he felt a bony grip on his shoulder. Come with me. And death led him down through the forest and down into a cave. And in this cave, there were millions and millions of candles. And whenever a candle would go out, Death would reach down and he'd pick up a new candle and he would light it. What is this place? Said his godson. This is the cave of life and death. The tall candles, those are children. The half candles, those are people in the prime of their lives. And the little tiny candles, those are the old people, the ones who are almost ready to die. But you, as a physician, as a doctor, you know it doesn't always work that way. Well, this frightened his godson, and he said, where is my candle? And Death pointed down to a little sliver of a candle. It was almost a puddle with a tiny little flame in it. And the godson said, that can't be my candle. Didn't you just hear what happened? I'm gonna be your king. You can't do this to me. Reach down and get a large candle and take my candle and let the wicks join, and so the flame will never go out, and then I can have the long life that I deserve. So Death reached down. He picked up a long candle, and then he picked up his godson's little candle. And just as he was bringing them together, he blew it out. And his godson dropped dead to the floor. Because rich, poor, pauper, king, hated, beloved, death comes for us all. And that was Godfather Death. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Clayton. Have you ever heard the saying, truth is stranger than fiction? Well, in this case, truth is not as funny as fiction. This is a song by Shel Silverstein and Baxter Taylor, and it's about the voodoo queen of New Orleans named Marie Laveau. So the truth about Marie Laveau is she was real. In fact, just last month, she would have celebrated her 222nd birthday. She was an herbalist, a healer, a midwife, and apparently a beautiful hairdresser. And her clientele were among the richest, most powerful, influential people in all of New Orleans. And she ruled as the voodoo queen for more than a quarter of a century. So that's the truth about Marie Laveau. Shel Silverstein, this is where it gets funny. Shel Silverstein, the guy who wrote Light in the Attic, Where the Sidewalk Ends, The Giving Tree, that guy, he makes Marie Laveau to be a more of a stereotypical swamp witch hag, shacking up in some fallen tree with all of her familiars out in some Louisiana bayou. He even gives her a crazy evil witch scream. Can you guys scream like a crazy evil witch? Nice. Man, I was gonna give you my example, but you're way better at this than me, so this is great, because I need you guys' help. So every time that witch scream comes along in this song, join on in. All right? I mean, I want people who are walking by or driving by with their windows down thinking, what the heck is going on in Bryant Park tonight? All right? So I'm gonna do this first verse twice, so you kind of get a feel for when the witch scream comes in. You guys ready to have some fun? Yeah, all right, here we go. Down in Louisiana where the black trees grow, there's a voodoo lady named Marie Laveau. She got a black cat's tooth and a mojo bone, and anyone who doesn't, leave her alone. She goes, ah, another man done gone. There you go. We'll do that again. It sounded real good. Down in Louisiana where the black trees grow, there's a voodoo lady named Marie Laveau. She got a black cat's tooth and a mojo bone, and anyone who doesn't, leave her alone. She goes, another man done gone. She lives in a swamp in a hollow log with a one-eyed snake and a three-legged dog. She got a bent, bony body, stringy hair, and if she ever catches you messing around down there, she'll go, another man done gone. Then one night when the moon was black, into the swamp come Handsome Jack, a no-good man like you all know. He was looking round for Marie Laveau. He said, Marie Laveau, you lovely witch, give me a charm that'll make me rich. Give me $1 million, tell you what I'll do. This very night I'm gonna marry you, and it'll be, another man done gone. So Marie did some magic and she took a little sand, made $1 million, put it in his hand. Then she giggled and she wiggled and she said, hey, hey, I was getting ready for my wedding day. Then old Handsome Jack, he said, goodbye, Marie. You're too darn ugly for a rich man like me. Then Marie started mumbling, her fangs started gnashing, her body started trembling, her eyes were flashing. She went, another man done gone. So if you ever get down to where the black trees grow, meet a voodoo lady named Marie Laveau. If she ever asks you to make her your wife, man, you better stay with her for the rest of your life, or it'll be another man done gone. Let's do that last verse one more time. So if you ever get down to where the black trees grow and meet a voodoo lady named Marie Laveau, if she ever asks you to make her your wife, man, you better stay with her for the rest of your life, or it'll be another man done gone. Let's just scream one more time. Ready? Another man done gone. Okay, last time. Really loud, really weird. Another man done gone. Children of the night, what music we made. Happy Halloween.
Nice music, Clayton. Good cackling. Wow. I thought I saw some cars stop. You did your job. Now you can just listen again. My name is Ken Ogus. I am a storyteller based in Indianapolis. I write flash fiction. I have a podcast. And tonight I'm telling you a story that is over 2,000 years old. A boy named Alexander was born in a little village overlooking a big, beautiful city in the shadow of a great mountain. He was born with a gift. His parents had named him Alexander after Alexander the Great, a great Greek leader. But this Alexander, he wanted to be remembered as an artist. He had a gift. He was so sensitive. He could feel and see and hear things other people did not. But when he came of age, instead of finding some kind of a position down in the big city studying with a bard or an artist, his parents said, "We are poor, Alexander. You need to go find work with a tradesman." And so he took a job with a carpenter who sent him out into the woods to cut down trees. And Alexander, when he got closer to the trees with an axe or a saw, he could feel the tree tremble with fear. And he mentioned that to the carpenter, who said, oh no, you are not cut out for this work." So Alexander found some other work. He went to the weaver. Now, usually women apprenticed with the weaver, but Alexander was drawn to the beautiful patterns of thread. And when the weaver was showing him the looms, Alexander got closer to them and he listened carefully, and he thought he could hear animals, people trying to break free from the strands, people who were trapped. And he mentioned that to the weaver, and she said, oh, you are sick in the head, boy. Go away, don't come back. Well, the baker needed help, and so he had Alexander stoking the ovens for baking bread. But when Alexander opened the doors to each of the ovens to put in more fuel, more wood, he thought he could hear the sounds of people crying out in pain and in fear. And when the baker heard this, he said, No, you are going to scare away our customers. Go away. So poor Alexander, who was failing at everything he had tried, he had hoped to be an artist, but now he went back to his parents empty-handed. And they went to consult with the elders of the village. The elders said, "There is something different about your son. Maybe he would be better off far from the village. Let's make him a shepherd." Good idea. So they gave him a staff. They gave him a dog to help him herd the sheep. And they gave him a horn. "Not for playing music, boy. You blow on this horn only if you're attacked by wolves." "Yes, sir," said Alexander. Well, the countryside, far from the village, far from the beautiful city, there was a great meadow where he was able to sit and watch his flock of sheep. And it was peaceful and quiet. But at night, he thought he could hear the sound of wolves hiding in the trees, getting closer, and it worried him. He loved that dog. He loved the sheep. He didn't want anything to happen to them, and so he blew the horn. And farmers came from nearby with pitchforks and lanterns. And when they found no wolves, they said, "Boy, were we not clear? You don't blow this horn unless there are wolves." Yes, sir, I understand." Well, the next day, it happened again. But this time Alexander had noticed the birds in the trees in the middle of the night had flown off, frightened by something terrible. And the sheep were restless. and there were strange sounds coming from the forest. And it was all he could do to keep the sheep in a herd. And he thought, oh no, oh, I can feel it. It's something terrible coming, not just for them, but for us. And he blew the horn again during the day, and the farmers came running with pitchforks. No wolves. Oh, Alexander. We're going to have to look for a different boy. And they left. And now Alexander, he watched the rest of the day, sitting in the meadow, watching the big, beautiful city where he had hoped to be an artist. And then he saw the smoke coming up from the mountain, and ash beginning to come up off the top of the mountain, darkening the sky. It began to rain pumice. He blew the horn again. Run, run for your lives. It's not wolves, it's the mountain itself. But there was nobody there. Nobody heard him. No one paid heed to his warning. And it got worse and worse. The pumice fell. The buildings in the grand, beautiful city shook and collapsed. They caught fire. More volcanic ash went up into the air. And within minutes, Alexander watched the beautiful city disappear. 12,000 people. Years passed, and Alexander, the shepherd, now an older man, would go into town occasionally for supplies, and the people would look at him and go, you were that boy. Alexander the shepherd, you were that boy. You saw the destruction of the great city, didn't you? You knew it was coming, didn't you? You tried to warn people, and they didn't listen. How did it feel to see so many people perish? How do you live with that, Alexander? And he looked at them and said sadly, if I told you, you wouldn't believe me. Then he went back to his meadow where he sat with his flock. And he cried out, I am so sorry. I could not help you, but you didn't listen to me. And he says this to his flock of ashen gray, not sheep. He is not Alexander, the shepherd of sheep. He is Alexander, the shepherd of 12,000 ghosts from the souls who perished in the city of Pompeii in the shadow of the great mountain Vesuvius 2,000 years ago. Thank you. Now, if you think that's terrifying, here's Patty.
Oh, that's what my husband says every morning. Hang on here just a minute. I want you to be able to see my scary face. My name is Patty. And originally, I'll try not to spit on all of you here. Originally, I come from Kansas. And when I was a kid, a bit ago, we heard lots of stories about Kansas folklore. There were Wyatt Earp and Bat Masterson and Dodge City. Gunsmoke was on at that time, and Kansas lore was something that we kids in the 50s listened to. And there was one other group of characters that we heard about. And that was a family.
a family named the Benders. A stranger was walking along the road in southern Kansas in the Flint Hills. Not many trees there. The sun was going down, and the wind was blowing pretty ferociously. And the stranger thought to himself, boy, I need to find some place to spend the night. I need to get something to eat. And he looked up, and on down the road he saw a cabin. And that cabin had light streaming out its windows. And he could see in the dusk that there was smoke coming out of the chimney. And he listened, and he could hear chopping. Somebody was chopping wood. Well, chopping wood, no doubt, for that wonderful fire that would warm him if they let him spend the night. And so the stranger went up to the door and he knocked. A pretty young woman opened the door. Hello, she said, won't you come in? Well, the stranger smiled at her and came in, and it smelled so good in there. Somebody was cooking something really nice. And she got him in, and she introduced him to her father and her mother, and pretty soon her brother came out from behind this blanket that they had put up between the kitchen area and the living quarters. The place, the stranger noted, was very simple, but it was clean. It was very tidy. And there was a tablecloth covered table, and on it 4 place settings. He said to the father of the family, I'm willing to give you something to, if I could just eat with, have a little bit to eat and maybe spend the night. Just name your price. And so the old gentleman named his price, and the stranger agreed and reached in his pocket and got out a roll of bills and peeled a couple off and gave them to the old gentleman. Well, the pretty young girl, she went to the cupboard, and she got out another place setting and put it on the table. So now there were 5 places to sit. Oh, come on over here, said the old man. You have the place of honor. And he set him down at the side of the table with his back to that old blanket. And there was food put on the table. And they all had big helpings of this food. And the stranger said, my, that's awfully good. What kind of meat is this? I can't identify the taste, but it is very good, ma'am. And the old lady said, well, it's kind of my specialty. And so they laughed, and they talked and spoke to each other, had a very congenial conversation. Pretty soon the son got up, and he got his plate and his silverware together, and he took it on back behind the blanket to the kitchen part, and the stranger was talking away, and pretty soon the son came back, and family didn't pay much attention to him when the son raised a hammer and ha! Broke the stranger's skull with that hammer. With that, the family got up from their places. They cleared their dishes. The son and the old gentleman heaved the body of the stranger up onto the tablecloth. They went through his pockets, pulled out his money, and even a watch. Took them away, and then they wrapped the stranger in the tablecloth. And the father and the son carried the stranger out toward the chopping block. There was a traveler, a stranger, walking down the road in southern Kansas when he heard the sound of someone chopping. No doubt, chopping wood. And that is a story based on a true story of the family that came to be known as the Bloody Benders, a story from Kansas. Little epilogue here. They weren't really a family. It was speculated that the Benders were more of a gang. And by the time the sheriff in Cherryvale and the townspeople started wondering about the people who were disappearing and put it together with the Benders were long gone. But when they dug up the Benders' garden, 11 human remains, sets of human remains were found. The Benders had enticed each of them in. The son had brought out that hammer, robbed them, and then the bodies were buried in the garden. I thought you'd want to know.
Hi, I'm Laura, and I'd like to tell you the story of a friend of mine. I call her Boo Baby Girl. She's about 2 years old. She's about 2 feet high, and she has big chubby legs, and she wears a big diaper, and she kind of, she has that toddler's walk where she kind of is bow-legged and kind of waddles around. Boo Baby Girl goes to nursery school. Now, if you ever want to remember this story and tell it to somebody else, here's something that's very important that you need to remember. She went to nursery school, and the name of the nursery school was the Pied Piper Nursery School. It was named after the story, The Pied Piper of Hamelin. And if you know that story, you know what it means when they say, the piper has to be paid. Well, one day, Boo Baby Girl was at nursery school, and she heard about a haunted house. It was right there in town. And in this house, there had been a woman. And you know, this kind of haunted houses that we have in haunted stories, they're built like this usually, with steep roofs that are called gables. Gables. And the woman that lived in that house, her name was Mabel. Mabel. This is the haunted house of Mabel's Gable. And Boo Baby was hearing about this haunted house. And Mabel, who had lived there, had died. And her body had not been found. And she was the richest woman in town. So people were a little afraid to go into that house because the body hadn't been found and her ghost was loose inside of the house. And it was flying around and it was looking for the body and it was guarding the gold that was in the house. Nobody had ever found any gold in the house, but they knew it was in there. Well, there were these two guys who decided they weren't afraid of ghosts. They were going to go down to that haunted house. They were going to get that gold. They were big guys, tough guys, mean guys. They were 8th grade boys. So these two guys went down to the house. Oops, sorry, we're having trouble here. So these two guys went down to the house, and one of those 8th grade boys stood out on the porch, and he was pumping iron while he was watching, while the other big, mean 8th grade boy was going into the house, and he walked up to the door, and he pulled it open. It squeaked, and he walked down the hall. Thumpa, ka-thump, ka-thump, ka-thump. And pretty soon he came to a great big room with a high ceiling. And there he saw it on a big oak table, a bag of gold. Wow, he said, I can't believe it. Gold. I'm going to be rich. And he thought about all of the things that he could buy, all the game accessories he could get online. And so he reached for that bag of gold. But when he did, he heard this voice, this loud howl, this moan. I am the voice. I am the ghost of Mabel's Gables. And I say the money stays on the table. Psst, he was out of there, running down the hall, past his friend, all the way away without any gold. Well, his friend looked at him and said, what a chicken. Well, I can go in and get that gold now, and I won't even have to share it with him. And so he started down to open the door, and he opened that big door, and he walked down the hall, the thump, the thump, the thump. And he came to the room, and he saw that bag of gold on the table, and he said, I'm rich. Look at that gold. And he thought about all the things that he could buy, maybe his own video equipment, and he could become an influencer. And he reached for that bag of gold, and just as he did, he heard that horrible voice. I am the ghost of Mabel's Gable, and I say the money stays on the table. Out he went without any gold. Ran all the way home. Well, like I said, Boo Baby Girl went to the Pied Piper nursery school. And she heard all about what had happened. She heard about the two boys. She heard about the ghosts. She heard about the money. And she thought, let me think. I could go down to that haunted house right after school and get myself some cash. And that's exactly what she did. She waddled down there on her big little legs, hitched up her diaper, climbed up the stairs, she opened that door. Eek! She walked down the hall. Thumpa, 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 thumpa. And there she saw it on the table, the bag of gold. And she looked at it and she thought, gummy bears. She reached for that bag of gold, and all of a sudden she heard the voice. I am the ghost of Mabel's Gable, and I say the money stays on the table. And Boo Baby Girl looked up and she said, I'm the baby from Pied Piper, and I say the money goes in my diaper. And she grabbed that money and she put it in her diaper and she walked out of that place with a diaper full of gold. And that's how the Boo Baby got rich. That's a story by a Chicago storyteller named Jim May. Thank you.
Hello, my name is John Stevens, and tonight I will be sharing a version of the classic urban legend, The Poison Dress. Once upon a time, there was a young girl who was very beautiful, and she dreamt of having the absolute perfect senior prom. Now, sadly, her parents died when she was young, so she lived with her grandmother, who was a talented but poor seamstress. So even though she couldn't always follow the latest fashion trends, her grandmother could take scraps of cloth and turn them into unique and stylish clothes as if by magic. So it was the day before prom, but there was a huge problem. The girl was without a prom date. But lucky for her, the very popular and very handsome quarterback of the high school football team found himself without a date to the prom as well. You see, his girlfriend was the head cheerleader, who was very glamorous and very popular as well. But she just died in a horrific house fire where she and her entire family were burned alive in a torturous death. Now, it later came out in the news that her family ran a puppy mill, so don't feel too bad for them. They also tried to cancel Christmas one time. They also said that Taylor Swift's music was overrated. So, the quarterback was desperate for a date. As the girl walked to school, he hid in the bushes and jumped out at her and got down on one knee. And then a flash mob started dancing in the streets. Overhead, a plane wrote "prom?" in the sky. The girl shed tears of joy and said, yes, yes, 1,000 times yes, to the promposal of her dreams. She couldn't wait to tell her grandmother all about it. The quarterback gave her all the important details. She was to meet him promptly at 6 p.m., all dressed and ready to go. And then they were going to go take group photos with the other quarterbacks and cheerleaders. Well, more football players, not just quarterbacks. And then they would take a stretch limo to the prom and dance the night away. So the girl told her grandmother all of this. And then she told her the most important thing, which was the quarterback had already bought a corsage for his dead girlfriend that was powder blue. And so she needed to coordinate her outfit with that color scheme. So she asked her grandmother for money to go buy a powder blue prom dress. With agonizing regret, the grandmother said that they didn't have any money to buy a dress. Heartbroken, the girl went to her room and cried until she fell into a deep sleep. All through the night, the grandmother worked her fingers to the bone, taking the fanciest scraps of fabric and sewing them together into a beautiful prom dress. It was colorful, it was fun, it expressed the girl and just her unique personality. And you could hold it up to any dress in any dress shop. The most expensive dress there is the same quality as the dress the grandmother made. So, the next morning, the girl wakes up and she sees that dress the grandmother made with her tireless love. And she cries tears of despair. You see, her dream was to wear the perfect blue corsage for her perfect prom date. And now she had no powder blue dress. She had no money to buy a dress. And if she didn't see her date at 6 p.m., her life would be over. She needed a miracle. But the grandmother knew from a lifetime of experience that miracles don't happen to young girls from poor homes. So she ignored her exhaustion, her frustration with her granddaughter, the humiliation of having failed her. And she took her granddaughter and the dress that she had made, and they went to every dress shop and thrift shop in town looking for a prom dress. But none of the thrift shops had any prom dresses, and none of the dress shops would accept an exchange instead of payment. So it seemed like they were out of luck. They tried one final place on the very outskirts of town. Grandmother showed the owner the dress, and the owner agreed to trade for a dress they got just earlier that day. The owner went to the back and brought it out, and it was a gorgeous, sparkly prom dress, and it was powder blue. The grandmother and granddaughter took the dress home. Grandmother made a few alterations, and it fit the girl perfectly. She did notice a slight smell coming from the dress. It reminded her of a time when she accidentally singed her hair on a curling iron, but she just sprayed on some extra perfume and didn't notice the smell anymore. Well, she showed up at the quarterback's house at 6 o'clock p.m., and they went to the group photo with all the football players and cheerleaders, and they were living for this girl. She looked so good, and for every photo, she was serving face and serving body, giving fierce looks. They were blown away. This was truly a Cinderella story. This unknown girl, just gorgeous, and she noticed that the smell had returned, and it was stronger this time. And she hoped that nobody noticed, but the people around her did. But luckily, they blamed a football player for having rancid farts. So the quarterback took the girl by the arm, got in a stretch limo, and went to prom. They had the time of their lives. They danced to every song, Everybody at the prom said that they were the best looking couple there. And it was about midnight when the girl noticed that the smell had come back. That putrid, rotting, burning smell was overpowering. She was about to faint. She heard someone whisper in her ear, "Give it back." She looked around. No one was there except her date, who was slowly backing away, gagging from that disgusting smell. She was just strong enough to ask to be taken home. And so he held his nose, and her date grabbed her, helped her into the limo, and she drove, well, didn't drive. She rode the rest of the way home alone. She left the limo and went into her house, and the limo driver was the last person to see her alive. The next morning, the grandmother opened the door to the girl's bedroom and was shocked by what she saw. On the bed, a corpse, charred, melted flesh. On the wall, in black ash, the words, "Give it back." The police were never able to come up with an official explanation for what happened to the girl. The dress, well, there are no traces of the dress on the body, but it has been reported that in thrift shops across the state, there is a specific powder blue dress that is often returned because of a horrid burning smell they can't get rid of. And the grandmother never made another dress. So in the spring, next May probably, you're going to be on social media and you're going to be scrolling through photos, and you'll begin to see picture after picture of high school kids dressed all up for their fairy tale proms. And look for the girl with the powder blue dress. Hope that she didn't let down the people who loved her the most. Hope that she didn't sell her soul to be there. Hope that she never had to hear the words, "Give it back." Thank you.
That's the end of our show tonight. Thank you so much for coming. We hope you had a good time. Let's give it up for all the tellers tonight. And if you do have friends or relatives that didn't get to come tonight, the program has been recorded and will be available soon on the Library Cats TV network. So join us there if you couldn't come tonight. Thank you to the Cats crew. Thank you to Chris Ramsey for doing sound, Crystal Ritter as our coordinator from the Bloomington Parks and Rec Department, and our other sponsor, the Monroe County Public Library. Good night.